Welcome to The Other Side, Mississippi Today's political podcast. I'm your host, Adam Ganucheau. The Other Side lets you hear directly from the most connected players and observers across the spectrum of politics in Mississippi. From breaking news to political strategy to interviews with candidates and elected officials, we'll bring you facts, perspectives, and context that helps you cut through the noise and understand all sides of the story. I'm your host, Adam Ganucheau. Joining me today in the studio are my colleagues at Mississippi Today, Taylor Vance. Hey, Taylor, how's it going?
Hey, Adam.
And Geoff Pender. Hey, Geoff.
Hey, how are y'all?
Doing okay. It's been yet another successful week of holding elected officials accountable and trying to help Mississippians better understand how their government leaders are serving them. And along those lines, I want to start with kind of a follow-up story that y'all got together. Taylor, I guess you wrote the story this week. 2 weeks ago, of course, we published a big investigation into earmark spending of Representative Trey Lamar, the House Ways and Means chairman, who appears to have steered a total of millions of dollars for neighborhoods where he lives, both in Tate County, his home county in North Mississippi, and also here in Jackson, where he owns a house on a small little cul-de-sac called Simwood Place. That project in particular, as part of y'all's bigger investigation a couple weeks ago, I think got maybe the most sort of attention and outcry from readers. It's one that seemed sort of so glaring that, at least in my mind, that people were upset, and I think they were most upset because of just the sort of juxtaposition of a state lawmaker appearing to steer $400,000 in state tax revenue and state tax dollars to repave this already well-paved street in Jackson where he owns the house. 14 houses on this sleepy little cul-de-sac in Northeast Jackson. And, of course, this is a capital city that, as y'all wrote, is infamous for its crumbling roads and bridges and a lack of money to fix them. So, Taylor, there's an update on this story in the past week. Tell us what happened last week.
Yeah. So if you read the legislation, it routed the Simwood Place project, which is the road where Representative Trey Lamar owns a home. It routed that money, that project, through a sort of a new committee called, or newish in terms of state government, called the Capital Complex Improvement District's Project Advisory Committee. I know that's kind of
a mouthful.
That is a mouthful. But it routed the money for that project and four other projects that the legislature allocated money for through this committee. Really, the main goal is for this committee to advise state leaders of how certain state tax dollars should be spent on improving, projects within the city of Jackson. And it just so happens that one of their meetings happened to be last Thursday. They meet quarterly. And it turns out that they also had questions not just about this Simwood Place project, but really sort of about how they were going to handle these projects that the legislature appropriated.
The legislature basically sets which projects they want funded, and they send it to this committee that...
Well, to back up, though, the origin of this committee is with the CCID, the legislature provided a sales tax rebate that's normally, money that would be rebated to the city, but for this part of the city, I think it's 9%. It's a
9% sales tax diversion.
Of the sales tax collected is going to be diverted to the CCID for infrastructure stuff. So this committee is supposed to take that money coming in and decide where it needs to go.
Gotcha.
But the legislature beyond that said, well, we have a few special projects we would like for you to, or not we would like that thou shalt do.
Right.
And they provided extra funding for those just out
Gotcha.
of state money.
And another thing is, I mean, Geoff, correct me if I'm wrong. Typically, how this would go is these types of projects would usually be routed through Hinds County Board of Supervisors, the city of Jackson, or some other type of entity that.
In this case, the
asked
city, it would be the city of Jackson.
Right. But that's not what happened. Again, these projects got routed through this committee, and basically some of the members of this committee they just kind of asked, well, what are we really supposed to do? Because our main goal is to come up with a master plan of how the sales tax diversion should be spent. It gets sent to the Department of Finance and Administration, then to kind of oversee the projects. But now they're being tasked with these other, legislative earmarks. But to make a sort of a long story short, the committee just said, well, I mean, if this is what the legislature wants us to do, we're going to go forward. We'll do it. But they're still ironing out kind of the timeline of when they'll solicit bids for the projects and which project will go first and different things like that. But they said that they want the project to proceed. The director of the Department of Finance and Administration, kind of where this committee is housed in, said that these projects are not going to languish. They are going to go forward. So that's sort of the update there is the Simwood Place project is going to go forward.
Yeah, I think that, the upshot, obviously, that the legislature funded it and this committee that they kind of feel like their hands are tied even if they wanted to stop it. It's their job. It's
right.
Statutorily sort of their responsibility to fund what the legislature has told them to fund. So
right.
That's really interesting. It was a good story. If you haven't read either that story or the original investigation, please go do that. You can search Geoff Pender or Taylor Vance's name on the website, or just go to the homepage and you'll probably see the update story as early in the week as you can. So I want to turn it to something else that the two of y'all covered this past week, kind of sticking on the House side of the legislature. We have talked a lot extensively on this podcast for years about the Republican leadership's effort to ultimately what they would like to do, some of them would like to do, is eliminate the state's income tax, individual income tax, which, as we've said, makes up about 30% of the state's total general fund revenue, which means that's 30% of the general fund budget that is funded every year is available to lawmakers because of our existing individual income tax collections. So, like I said, there's been a push among some legislative Republicans to totally eliminate that income tax, which would be the first. We would be the first state in America to do that, to have had an income tax and totally eliminate it in this way. Now, there has been a lot of, I think, hand-wringing and debate in the Capitol, even among other Republicans, about whether or not that's the right move. But one of the biggest champions of this idea to eliminate is House Speaker Jason White. Just this week, Jason White released the results of a poll that he and his office conducted of voters across the state, or of Mississippians across the state. And y'all had a story about that this past week. We just had Taylor talk a lot. So Geoff, I'll just ask, kind of what were the results of that poll, and what's the upshot in your mind?
Yeah. And actually, the poll covered a pretty wide gamut of issues, and I think Speaker White's stated goal with these select tax committees or whatever is that they're gonna be informed whatever decisions they make, and I think this polling was part of that. But one interesting thing, our income tax has already been greatly cut. I mean, there's still debate over elimination, but it's been cut to where we're one of the lowest in the nation already.
Those cuts are still being phased in.
And the cuts will still be being phased in through 2026. But one thing his poll showed, Taylor, I think you pointed this out in your story, is that a lot of respondents did say eliminating the income tax. They're in favor of it, and it's a top priority. But I think a greater percentage overall of respondents in the poll said they support reducing the grocery tax. More so, I think 84%ish.
Somewhere in that neighborhood.
Basically support that above the like 60-something percent support income tax. So again, that's going to be a big issue, and I think we've seen the Senate. There's probably more support in cutting the grocery tax than there is the income tax. So we'll see some tax cuts, it would appear, but there's going to be great debate on which ones to cut.
Yeah. I'll say this about polling, and I know that y'all can weigh in on this as well. I mean, first off, you have to understand this poll was commissioned by the speaker, who has an agenda. Literally, he has an agenda. That's what high-ranking elected officials do, is they try to get their ideas and goals passed. So, you have to think about this poll in that context. But I also, and this is, we ran a series of polls we went out and found, one of the most reputable pollsters in America in last year's election cycle, the 2023 election cycle, in Siena College. Siena is totally recognized, broadly recognized as one of the kind of fairest and sort of apolitical pollsters across the country. And what I found in that process, it was my first time kind of dealing with polls in that way myself, and sort of trying to craft the questions and thinking about, like, how do we really drill into how Mississippians are feeling. We asked some questions in our series of polls in 2023 about specifically these two taxes, both the income tax and the proposals to eliminate the income tax, and also the grocery tax. And the first question you ask on these polls is, do you support eliminating the income tax? I found that when we ran those polls for ourselves, those questions weren't the most informative, because, and that's what the pollsters would say too, because every American doesn't want to pay a tax. Like, I don't care who you are, I don't care what your ideological background or interests are. You're going to say, yeah, if I had a chance to not pay a certain tax, I would obviously take that chance. And I think a lot of people taking a poll, regardless of their position on it, would say the same. I think the interesting thing in polls is when you kind of get to drill in a little bit further. And it's, politicians may call this message testing. As journalists, we kind of saw it as like, let's provide a little bit deeper information about the potential of an income tax elimination, and then ask people whether they still support it or not. So, I think that while it's interesting to see numbers like this in Speaker White's poll, I wonder if you asked a follow-up question or two saying, after you ask, do you support eliminating the income tax? Then the next question on the poll could be, just so you know, the income tax makes up 30% of our state's general fund revenue, which, means 30% less state tax dollars in theory to fund basic government services like roads and bridges or education or public safety or whatever. I think that, people's answer might be a little bit different there. And that's just kind of the nature of polling a little bit. For what it's worth, coming from me, I'm not a polling expert or anything, but like I said, we had a little experience with this ourselves.
Yeah, and we should say, when you look at, for lack of a better phrase, a head-to-head with income tax and grocery,
sure,
same thing we saw.
Of course,
grocery tax appears to be more popular.
Sure.
Yeah, and I guess to follow up on what you were saying, Adam, most people would say, yes, they want their taxes cut, but I also think if you ask them, do you want better government services?
Of course, yeah.
They're going to say yes, which is sort of what this poll also showed, is, a high percentage of respondents said that they want more funding for roads and bridges,
Sure.
or to improve roads and bridges, that they want the state to expand Medicaid coverage.
Yeah, this one adds to the growing stack of polls that showed pretty strong support, bipartisan, across all other lines for Medicaid expansion.
Sure. So I guess just to finish out, my thoughts here is I guess it will be very interesting to see during the upcoming legislative session what the overall tax cut package is. Are we going to see a reduction in both the income tax and the grocery tax? Are we going to see an increase in the gasoline tax that funds, that funds the Department of Transportation's budget for improving roads and bridges? How is it going to work? Because I don't think you can just completely reduce taxes and increase government services without raising a tax somewhere.
Right. And that's something that, for what it's worth, Governor Tate Reeves has long opposed what they call a tax swap there, sort of cutting one tax and raising another tax to sort of offset some of the revenue loss. And I'll also say, obviously, like we said, Jason White is using this poll as sort of a political tool going into this legislative session. It's obvious, and it's maybe considered smart. I don't know. You could make that argument. But if you're Lieutenant Governor Delbert Hosemann, who has been, leader of the Senate, he has been apprehensive about total elimination of the income tax. I think he probably looks at this poll and says, that's a cute little poll, Mr. Speaker, but, I've got my own ideas about how I want to approach this during this legislative session. So obviously, as we have said many, many times, this is going to be such a battleground in the 2025 legislative session.
Right.
And God knows how it's going to turn out.
And I'm wondering, is there anything the lieutenant governor is not apprehensive about, be it Medicaid expansion, whether the sky is blue?
I know one thing he's not apprehensive about: setting study committees, deciding not to move on policy because he wants to study them a little bit more, and sometimes follows through with those study committees and sometimes doesn't. But hey, that's, like I said, a big issue coming up as we look ahead to the 2025 legislative session. Guys, I want to end on, we are, 2 weeks out now-ish from, just one of the biggest elections of our lifetime. Of course, the presidential election is happening on November 5th. But here in Mississippi, we also have a handful of other races. We have a U.S. Senate race. Incumbent Republican Roger Wickers running for yet another term. He faces Democratic challenger Ty Pinkins. I think most political prognosticators don't think that'll be too much of a race, but we'll see how that goes. We have other races across the state, some judicial races, and I want to talk about one of those because I think that's the one that we and most others are really zoned in on. But I'll mention we have some school board races this November too. That's always an interesting one, especially this day and age. And I think we'll drill into that a little bit more, as we get closer to November 5th. But to end today's episode, I want to talk to y'all and get your thoughts on the one judicial race in particular. It's a Supreme Court race. Incumbent Justice Jim Kitchens, he has been on the bench, the Supreme Court, for many, many years, longtime incumbent who faces, let's see, I'm counting 4 total challengers here. Abigail Robinson, Ceola James, Byron Carter, and most probably notably here, Republican State Senator Jennifer Branning from Philadelphia. This is obviously one that there's a lot of money that's been pumped into this race, millions of dollars on both sides, to cumulatively millions from both sides at least. I'm starting to see a bunch of ads from Branning. I haven't seen a ton of television or digital ads yet from Kitchens, but I sure have seen Jim Kitchens signs, yard signs, and all over the district, really, central Mississippi. Taylor, I'll start with you. Kind of what are you watching out for in this race? What's piquing your interest as we approach Election Day here?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, as you said, I'm watching that Supreme Court race pretty closely. I think it'll be interesting to see how that race shakes out. Not only is Justice Kitchens has he been on the bench for a long period of time, he's the second most senior justice. And so if the current Chief Justice of the state Supreme Court, Mike Randolph, were to resign, retire, or something like that, he would take over as Chief Justice, and Chief Justice does have a lot of power. in the state. They appoint special judges in certain cases and have some other administrative functions. So it's very important. It seems like the Republican machine, so to speak, has really gotten behind Senator Branning, which is not a surprise. She's a Republican state senator. Really the central district, is more of a Democratic leaning district, but not by a large, margin. So it should be a close race. But there's also two other judicial races.
Yeah.
So David Sullivan is challenging incumbent, Justice Don Beam down on the coast, which should be interesting. And there's an open race for the Court of Appeals,
also
an
on the
open
coast.
seat for the Court of Appeals. And there's some big names running down there.
Yeah.
A lot of them important judicial races.
Yeah. Geoff, what's your take on that Central District Supreme Court race?
Yeah, as Taylor said, the heart of the issue is people look at that and think, well, Kitchens is one of only a couple considered, more liberal on that on that court. And he is. He's in line. He's next in line to lead the court, and I think that's why we're seeing a good bit of special interest money. It's not just a Supreme Court seat. A Chief Justice helps route who does what as far as decisions, appoint special panels to hear stuff. So. A whole lot of legal interest across the state in who might be next to lead the court.
Sure.
And so I don't know, that seat's kind of a proxy battle for a bigger bigger issue there.
That's right. I think that you can see that if you've seen any of these Jennifer Branning ads on TV or social media, you can see what's happening here. There's the ads are framed around, these are nonpartisan races. These judicial races, you're not claiming Republican or Democrat.
I think if you watch those ads,
you get a very clear
you get the picture.
You get right up to the line.
She's calling herself a strong constitutional conservative. While I saw one of her digital ads that was like video footage of rioters in some faraway city, far from Mississippi, breaking into buildings and stuff like that. And we're talking about. I'll say this. I've covered Jennifer Branning since she's been in the state Senate. We're talking about one of the most conservative Republican members of that body. Somebody who has championed, some of the more what some might consider radical conservative policies. Who has been on the front lines. She defended House Bill 1523 back in 2016, which is, of course, the anti-LGBT law, as it was dubbed by everybody across the country that year. She is really, if you talk about just that sort of juxtaposition between Justice Jim Kitchens, one of the two true liberals on the court, versus Jennifer Branning, I'm not sure in Mississippi, by Mississippi political standards, you could find two people who are farther on that political spectrum than the two of them. And that's what we're seeing. That's why the big fight's happening. And I've noticed the past couple weeks, Branning has really benefited from the strong arm of the Republican Party establishment. She's had this sort of, had a luncheon, it looked like, with Governor Tate Reeves and posted it all on social media. She's been posting pictures from fundraisers in Madison and Rankin counties with, some of the more establishment type donors and officials within the Mississippi Republican Party. So they're flexing their muscle right now. They're doing all they can to get her elected on November 5th, and we'll see how it turns out.
Yeah.
How about is the mighty Democratic Party machine at work and on the other side of that race?
I'm not sure we could find a pulse on that side of the aisle.
I was going to say, Geoff, your question implies that there is a machine.
Right.
One last thing I would just point out, about that is because there are more than two candidates running in that race, it is possible for there to be a runoff if neither candidate,
if not likely.
If a candidate does not get an outright majority of the votes, then there will be a runoff election to take place. I believe it's 3 weeks later, but it would be later.
3 weeks now.
It would be later
I think.
Later in November, and anything can happen. And
that's going to be fascinating if it does happen. And it's hard to have 5 candidates facing each other and not to go to a runoff. And we'll see. But that would be a fascinating 3-week stretch to watch how that unfolds. Even more money from both sides would pump in. You guarantee that. Well, Taylor and Geoff, appreciate y'all being here and running us through some pretty big news from the past week or so. And, of course, we're looking ahead to both the November 5th election and also the 2025 legislative session. As always, appreciate y'all staying on top of it for us. Thanks for being here.
Thanks.
Thanks.
As we cover the biggest political stories in the state, you don't want to miss an episode of The Other Side. We'll bring you more reporting from every corner of the state, sharing the voices of Mississippians and how they are impacted by the news. So what do we need from you, the listener? We need your feedback and support. Subscribe to our weekly podcast on your favorite podcast app or stream episodes online at mississippi.today.org/The Other Side. For the Mississippi Today team, I'm Adam Ganucheau. The Other Side is produced by Mississippi Today and engineered by Blue Sky Studios. We hope you'll join us for our next episode.